Hey, and welcome to Discovering Exodus. This is chapter 16, so day 16 of our journey. And just want to remind you, the handouts for every chapter are on my website, KristenTschida.com. All right, we're going to get right into it. Today, I'm going to focus on manna. So I'm going to focus on God's provision of that to the Israelites. I have my notes. And I have my Bible right in front of me. So if I'm looking down, I'm glancing at what I've written that I want to just share with you today. All right, let's start in verse 3 of Exodus 16, because the verse 1 and 2 is telling us where they're going. And it says in verse 3, the Israelites said to them, Moses and Aaron, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you've brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." It's a lovely, lovely thought. Verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I'll test them to see whether they will follow my instructions." And then verse 6 and 7. So Moses and Aaron said to all of the Israelites, "In the evening, you'll know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he's heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Okay, so we have a group of people that are in the wilderness. They have only been traveling for like 6 weeks. And apparently, they're not really starving because they left with provisions. So they must be realizing that they're going to be at the end of their provisions, and they are now starting to grumble. What are we going to do? Oh, if only we had died by the Lord's hand. How quickly we forget. And isn't that just a lot like us? But we see God's answer to them. And his answer to their grumbling and complaining is mercy. And so he rains down heaven, or bread from heaven. And before I share about that specific, about manna, I just want to take a minute to just to take a minute of what the Israelites have known. So they have been in bondage for over 400 years. The only gods that they have known and served are the pagan gods of Egypt. So the only life that they knew in this great big empire of Egypt was one where they were oppressed, where they were actually going and they were serving the Egyptian people. They're in chains, not specifically chains, but they're in chains. And God's desire is, he sees that there's this people, and his desire is to bring this people. He's wanting to show them a whole new way of living, a whole new way of life. We have to give the Israelites some credit, because really the only gods that they knew were, they had to be appeased. They had total control. They didn't have interaction with mankind. So this is what they've been under. And now God comes. So they're wondering, is this God unreliable? Can we trust him? Is he going to do to us what he did to the Egyptians? So we have to kind of give him a little slack, because I read this and I'm like, are you kidding me? Look what God has done. And so as I've been just kind of looking again at their history and reading about where they're at spiritually, just to know that they're afraid really, and they don't know really much about God. So this manna, this provision of manna, this is going to do something to them, not only for their bodies, but for their spirit, that they are going to know that this is the true God. This is the one whom you can trust. This is the one who will be your provider. This is the one who will sustain your life. All right, so we know that God in his grace and his mercy. I mean, just think about the reality of, for 40 years, they were sustained by manna from the desert. And just, we can read this account and just think, oh, I've read it so many times. Yeah, they got manna in the desert. But the reality of, and I just love, he rains bread down from heaven. And I just wrote in my journal, these are resources that have never existed before this time, and never since this time in history has God done something like this miraculous? And we know that for 40 years they were sustained by it. So this manna gave them everything that they needed for maintaining their body's health, for maintaining just even strength and energy. God wants them to know that he is their provider and sustainer. This was miraculous, life-sustaining bread. And we read through chapter 16, they say in verse 14 and 15, so it came there's a layer of camp in the morning, and when the dew was gone, these thin flakes, verse 14, like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. And when the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it is. And Moses says it's the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. So their response to this amazing gift from heaven was, what is it? It's like it's something too wonderful to be understood. And they kept the wonderment of what it was in its name. What is it? And God calls it the bread from heaven. So, okay, I got a couple thoughts of where I want to just kind of go as we begin to even wrap up. So again, prior to the Israelites having been freed in their liberation, the only life that they knew, and I wrote this down to just kind of read it so I don't get it messed up. The only life they knew in Egypt was an empire where they were the ones who constructed storehouses for food, where they were exposed constantly to a hoarding, to this competitive environment with one another, where human lives were abused, they were broken in order to fuel the power of Pharaoh. Step back, and now we have manna. And so even this miraculous provision where God lays out, this is how I want you to do it, collect just enough for your family each day, but on day 6, he's already making a provision. This is his way of, his desire is to shape them into just a different kind of people, to shape a different kind of community. And in this practice, this daily practice of going and getting the manna for their families, they will learn to trust God. And in this, even in this chapter, we see the Sabbath keeping that God mentions. For the 6th day, they were to gather as much as they would need for their family for that day, and then on the 7th day. So he's laying out the idea, the concept that our bodies need rest and they need to be rejuvenated. This was a concept the Israelites had never known. They had never known rest. They had never known what it was for their bodies to be rejuvenated, to be refreshed, to take time with their families. So God instituting miraculous provision for food, he's also laying the groundwork for Sabbath keeping. And we see the beginning of God now wooing his people. He's brought them into the desert, and through this time in the desert, he's going to shape them into a powerful nation. But they have been a slave people. The only way they know how to respond to power is that the one who's in charge rules and lords it over the people. So even as Moses has stepped into this role, Aaron stepped in this role, what they know of someone in power is someone who will inflict, if you don't follow my ways, I will inflict punishment. So as they begin to now learn to have a new way to relate to God, that too is going to be a way of testing. We have to understand they're coming out of a slave mentality, and to transfer into a free man, free people, a new way of living. And we're going to kind of look at all of that. This is the beginning of the instituting of it. So we're like 6 weeks in, and God is already saying, you know what? I love you. I want my mercy to come to you. So he rains down his mercy from heaven in the form of manna, of this little wafer that will sustain them for 40 years in the wilderness. What we also see about this is the daily dependence. And nothing's changed. since we see this manna, supernatural provision, was a daily reminder of their daily dependence on God. God wanted to cultivate their daily dependence on him by providing for their needs on a daily basis. And he does that same thing for us. We look at the Lord's Prayer, what Jesus taught us to pray. Give us today our daily bread. So we have that. God's teaching us, Jesus was teaching us the same thing. We come to him for daily provision, supernatural, in the spirit, in our minds, in our bodies. It's not only the material provision that we need, but it's the spiritual provision that we need. We come to him and we say, God, I need you today. I need fresh manna today. And God also knows that if he provided too much too soon, that, like the Israelites, we would lose a spiritual hunger. And we would be all about the provision instead of looking at the provider. So we want to make sure, like the Israelites, that we are seeking God for his daily provision for our spiritual needs, for our emotional needs, for our physical needs, and that we bring even the needs of our community, because Jesus taught us to pray, give us today our daily bread, not mine. I'm not focused on just me. And even we see that with the Israelite community. They all went out and gathered. So it's a community effort, and they're learning together to depend on God daily. He is an amazing, and I was like, I love the idea of what is it? The wonderment. So let us keep this place of wonder in our hearts, that every day we come with this wonderment of saying, what is it today, God? What is it today in your provision for me, my spirit, my material needs? That would be something that is miraculous and supernatural. Let's keep our eyes open to look for that. All right, I'll see you in chapter 17.